Hey guys, this is Shintai. With me, I have some very good friends of mine. I have Swordfish1390. How are you doing?
Good, thank you for having me.
No problem. And I also have my friend ForestReviews. How you doing, man?
Hey, what's going on?
Today we're going to be doing a review of Tales of Legendia, a game that a lot of people consider the black sheep of the Tales series. We all have some pretty unique views on the game. Pretty unique game in and of itself. It's kind of an oddity in the Tales series in that it wasn't actually developed by the Tales studio. It was actually developed by the Soul Calibur team. It's also got a lot of elements in it that are still very much in the Tales series, but it does a few things a little bit different. I just think it'll be interesting if all three of us talk about it because we all have our own thoughts and views on the game. Let's start with you, Sword.
I think out of the three of us, personally, I'm going to have to be the most negative. Now, it's not to say Legendia is a bad game. I mean, it does have its merits. There are things where I feel that it was close but no cigar, but there are elements that worked, and I wish, the whole result would have been good. Like, for example, one of my favorite parts of the game is the characters. I mean, aside from a few, like Shirley and the Or Soren and the Bouncers, I like everyone. Like, all the playable characters, they pair off each other really well. They all have their own relationships. No one feels like an odd man out. And also, I really did like the soundtrack, but everything else kind of was close or meh or fail. But that's not to say Legendia is a bad game. I mean, it definitely is my least favorite in the series, though.
I wouldn't say it's my least favorite in the series, but I would say it's one of the lesser games in the series. I consider it lower than Symphonia or Graces or Abyss. To be honest, even a lesser game in this series, I would consider to be better than most other games. I feel that way about Legendia. I would take Legendia over an average game. I consider Legendia to be a fairly competently well-made game. What about you, Forrest?
Now, here's where I differ completely in opposite direction amongst Shintai and Sword. I absolutely love Legendia. It's the first Tales game in the series I played and finished, and my favorite Tales game in the entire series. The reason I like this game a lot is more or less its characters. I think it's probably some of the best characters in a Tales game, particularly Shirley, which I find kind of interesting, and Sentinel as well. But what really intrigued me about this game so much was after playing other games and previous JRPGs before this game, I honestly have to say that I was confused a little bit in a sense. There couldn't be another game that could pull me in and be fresh and be different after playing some of the other games like Final Fantasy before that and a few other ones. But Legendia, as interesting as it is and as unique as it is, being that it wasn't made by the Tales team, it did some things that I thought was interesting. The music was outstanding, and honestly, you couldn't beat some of the more interesting quotes and lines, and I honestly think the game has a lot of great things going for it. Granted, it does have a lot of faults, which I will not say it does not. It does, but we'll probably get into that later. But I'm probably, out of the three, is my absolute favorite Tales game, even more so over Vesperia and Graces.
I think that this is, like I said before, a good game. I don't disagree with you on that, Forrest. I don't like it as much as some of the other Tales games, but I do still think it's good. Something that a lot of people have a problem with in this game is the visuals. And I think that primarily has to do with a lot of people who played Legendia most likely played Symphonia first. And there is absolutely no contest. Symphonia looks a lot better. It's cel-shaded, vibrant, and it's colorful, and it looks great. And Legendia, by comparison, doesn't look quite as good. Especially the character models, I feel, which they look all stumpy. They look like the characters from Final Fantasy VII.
But surprisingly enough, that you mentioned 7, that was a vibe I got from Legendia. Because looking back on being one of my favorite, in a sense that was so different and so unique, kind of like Legendia's case. 7 was just completely different for me because prior to that, I'd never played JRPGs before. Having that nostalgia of the blocky hands and the blocky character graphics, it kind of put me back in nostalgia to 7. As weird as that is to say, I never really had a problem with the graphics. Although I will completely agree that Legendia looks pretty bad in comparison to all the rest of them.
See, this is where I kind of draw the line. Now, I'm not a graphics whore. Graphics don't make a game to me, but Legendia to me was like, oh my god, this is like, seriously, Final Fantasy 8 and 9 look better. This looks like something straight out of RPG Maker 2. The enemy models look like they were out of Final Fantasy 7.5. The character models I found to be very lackluster. It was just, in my opinion, not a very good looking game. I mean, the 2D art of the characters looked really nice, and despite the simple color palette of the menus, I still think think they look very well organized and nice to look at. But other than that, Legendia's graphics, in my opinion, are very low tier.
I thought the comparison to Final Fantasy VII in terms of visuals was pretty apt because the character models don't look that good. But me personally, I thought the environments actually did look really good. Not necessarily the world map. Whenever you're in a dungeon or something, or you're in town, the environments actually looked pretty good, much like Final Fantasy VII, where the environments look superior to the actual character model.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think 7 and Legendia share that graphical appeal.
Something else that really stands out about this game, in my opinion, is the music. Typically, the music in the Tales series is composed by Motoi Sakuraba, who typically also does the music for a lot of Tri-Ace games, like the Star Ocean games and even on Discovery. But this game was not done by him. It was done by someone else, and I think he did a great soundtrack in my opinion. One of my favorite songs in the game is one that you listen to in the final dungeon. It's just this really great, empowering song. The music in this game I just thought was very different from other Tales games, and I think that was one of the things that made it stand out. It was very different. It went to the drum of its own beat. Instead of trying to copycat Mr. Sakuraba's style, this person did his own style.
I agree that it is a very great soundtrack. Honestly, it was when I first played the game, I was a little thrown off because it was so different, and I was like, I don't really like this at first, but within just a few hours of the game, not only did it grow on me, I actually find it to be one of the best soundtracks I've heard in recent memory. Series-wise, it isn't my favorite soundtrack. Like, I don't find it to be quite as strong as, like, say, Abyss and Symphonia, but it is still a very good soundtrack. If you don't compare it to the other games, it has its own two legs to stand on, and I'm very happy with the end result of the soundtrack.
Well, for me, on this game, in comparison to the rest of the series, it's my absolute favorite. It's different to me that a lot of the songs in this game does contain a lot more vocals. You will hear a lot of other different songs with words, especially when you first start the game. You hear this really kind of calming song that was absolutely outstanding. And I first heard it, I just kind of sat there and looked at the screen and heard this song. I was like, wow, this is actually really good. Throughout the course of the game, there were so many different ones, like Chasing Shirley's theme was actually really good. I honestly thought the music in this game, to me, was outstanding. But not to say that any of the other Tales games don't have a good soundtrack, they do. I found this one to be more original and more different. For each scene that's going on in the game, it matches it.
I thought one of the things that made the soundtrack really unique was the heavy emphasis of violins. That's not something you typically hear in a soundtrack. I thought that was one of the contributing factors that made the soundtrack really stand out, I feel.
I agree with that too, but I think honestly the vocals was one of the more appealing approaches, because if you look at all the other Tales games that I've played thus far, with the exception of the import Japanese Tales games, which most of the intros in the American versions have either gutted vocals or all different tunes altogether, I think the approach to having vocals to emphasize the importance of that scene was done very well, and it gives that game a little more appeal, and it makes you understand and it makes you feel like you're actually there, and it just highlights the very importance of the story when you listen to the vocals and the songs that are played during that very moment.
I do think that the music does a good job of being like fitting with the atmosphere. Every song doesn't feel out of place, and it doesn't feel like, oh, this is too peppy or this is too depressing for this scene. Everything feels like it's just in place.
Let's move on to the story. Me personally, I don't think the story is amazing or anything like that. Setting aside the characters for now, just focusing on the main plot, I think that it's nothing amazing, but I think it works well. I think the only real problem with it is I feel that the story does take a while before it starts throwing in some cool plot twists, which actually drastically change the tone of the story in a good way. Other than that, I thought the story was solid. Nothing was like really glaringly wrong with it, and it wasn't really amazing either, but I thought it worked pretty well.
What I really liked about the story of Legendia was the fact that on the entire premise of this game, you're on this huge continent that's like a ship in the middle of the ocean. And you start out the story on a boat, which almost gets completely trashed by this huge island that's on the top of a boat, so to speak. Shirley, I think she lands on the island, starts to realize that, wait a minute, this is not actually landmass. I like that idea behind it. And the whole premise of that story being on this ship-like continent was just weird. When you look at the other Tales games, they're all either on an actual planet, which technically speaking it is on a planet, but you don't really know nothing about the planet, which is kind of odd. You know, you don't really know anything outside of this ship that's floating in, in the ocean. I didn't like the whole approach behind the fact that you don't know the reasoning behind this continent ship, so to speak. It's still interesting that they're on this thing that's floating in the water. Besides that though, the story itself, I will admit, I wouldn't say it pulled me in. It was anything crazy interesting. But in the middle of the story, you'll start to see drastic changes in character personality personality. Sentinel, he can be a little bit condescending, sort of, just a small tad. I wouldn't say completely. You will start to realize what's really going on in the story's plot when you get hooked on a character and you really start to like a character. And when something drastically happens, for people who haven't played it, I won't spoil it, but you immediately start to feel like, oh my goodness, really, did this just happen? And the game will not give you any explanation. It will completely keep you kind of blindsided until it actually happens. And when you see this happen, you start to feel the connection with these characters. And that's kind of how I felt, especially, with a lot of these other characters that you meet later on in the game. In the course of the game, it does start off slow, and then it approaches steadily on the main plot of the story, the important plot of the story. But it does have its small humor that breaks away the monotony of the actual story. So it does give you kind of a little small background of what's going on in the town that you'll be in, and it just works very well. I honestly think the story is not anything to brag about, but it works for what the plot and the characters themselves are trying to accomplish.
For me, the story, I'm kind of mixed. I do like the concept that you're on this ship. In fact, it's a very original idea, how there's all this lush green wildlife and all the forests and stuff on the Legacy, and I thought that was a really neat idea. The saving grace for me for this story is the characters. I mentioned this before, and honestly, I'd actually go as far as to say that for the most part, except for a few, the characters are excellent. They're very memorable. I haven't beaten the game yet, but I'm at the very end, and I haven't touched in a while, and I still remember the characters. You could have the greatest story in the world. If you don't have the characters, it's just, if you can't care about them, then it's just wasted. Another one of the major faults, though, to me in the game is that it just takes way too long. When I say way too long, I mean way too long to pick up. And then when it finally does pick up, yeah, there are some definitely neat twists. I really did enjoy some of these twists. There are also times where they show a hint of an awesome scene, and then they take it away. There are just so many scenes that tease you. It's like dangle it in front of your face like a doggy treat. You're like, oh, give me. Nope, you can't have it. Nope. Despite that, the characters, like I said, are excellent. The chemistry is excellent. The personalities are excellent. The twists that aren't teases are very good. But again, like I said before, the story to me is mostly a mixed bag.
I have to agree with you on the characters. I do think that the characters in this are really great, and they're probably one of the best casts of characters I've seen in the Tales series, which is saying a lot, because to anyone who's played any of the Tales games would know, the Tales series is known for their great characters. These are all games with characters that you come to love very easily. Legendia, I think, has one of the best. The cast of characters isn't my favorite, but it's definitely one of my favorites. I think that Sentinel is a really cool protagonist. He grows as you play through the game. Like Forrest said, he starts off as, kind of condescending. He's very cocky and arrogant, but he eats his word. He learns to grow up and stop acting like a child. There's also Chloe, who I think is the best character in the game. She is my favorite, who's a very noble character. Very straightforward. Despite the fact that she's a very skilled swordsman, she's still a girl, and she still likes girly things. Little things like that make them more than just a one-dimensional character. They're well-rounded characters that interact with each other very well, and a lot of the enjoyment of the story comes from the character interactions, because they like messing with each other. They act like they're a real group of friends. They really feel like, instead of just knowing each other for the little amount of time they've known each other in the story, they feel like they're long-time friends, even though they've just met each other. That's how good their chemistry is.
I just want to mention, though, kind of going a little off topic, that I think Sentinel and Chloe are, like, pretty much the perfect pair. There are a lot of couples in every video game, but I thought they were just the perfect pair. One of the best I've seen in a while.
I'm actually going to have to agree with you, but there's actually a point in the game where you start to see other things kind of come up, that when they're trying to get close, something weird or something will throw it completely off. And there were times I'm just like, oh, come on now. Really? Why? What the fucking shit? It's kind of one of those things that just throws back to the whole reality that in games like this that tries to have a little bit of character development, whether it be in a relationship, whether it be somebody you like or something, it's done in this game, I think, positively, because it doesn't throw anything too fast to you with these characters. It's not like, oh my god, it's one of those things that between these two characters, and like Sword said, it's done well. I think that approach was solid. I really do think that it was done in a positive light for this game, being that some of the stuff that's going to change in the story drastically, it's kind of an added appeal that I think works very well.
I think we should go into the battle system. The Tales series is a series that is known for their battle system. This is a series that has had an action RPG system since the beginning, and Tales of Legendia is no different. It still has the action RPG battle system, but it does a few things different with it that people, especially since their first was Symphonia, when they jump into Legendia, may have been thrown off on, because Legendia actually plays more similarly to the old 2D Tales game, in that everything is all on one screen, because the other ones, the 3D ones, it's in a sort of a circle arena of sorts, and you can move around a little bit more. And here, it's completely all on one flat screen. So because of that, the combat is different, and I also feel that the combat in Legendia takes some getting used to. The controls aren't bad, I don't think, but they don't flow quite as good as Symphonia or Abyss, Speria. Again, not to say that it's bad, just that it will take a little bit more getting used to. I feel that by the time that you do, you'll be pulling off combos, really cool moves like flying up in the air, kicking enemies in the face and stuff. Not the most complex of the Tales battle system. I think that it's pretty mid-tier in terms of the battle system, I feel. There are definitely better ones like Grace's, but I still think it's good and enjoyable.
As much as I love this game, and I really do, my biggest gripe with the battle system strings around the fact that the random encounter is extremely high, and to a point that you could even walk a half a step up. I even heard a song a split second and you get to another fight. I think I had that happen to me. I think I got into a fight literally within like a 10-minute span, probably 30 times.
That's actually another thing that's different about this game than the other 3D Tales games, is that this game employs random encounters instead of what the 3D ones did, which was you have an enemy on screen, you have to approach the enemy in order to activate the battle. And here uses the traditional random encounters,
which I thought was a step down from Symphonia. I mean, considering Symphonia came first, they'd be like, that was a pretty good idea.
It's fine that it's random encounter. It's okay if it's done right. Legendia's case, it wasn't done in the best way possible. When you're on the world map, you actually walk around the three-dimensional actual world map. But if you're walking so slow to get to your next destination, and I mean slow, it's really one of those games that the encounter rate is really, really high. It gets to a point that when you get in so many battles, you're going to start to realize the game's flaws in its gameplay part. Unlike other Tales games where you have a lot more customizations, a lot more freedom in some of the newer games, when you step back to Legendia's case, it's a little more limited. There's not this huge amount of combos that you can unlock. Not to say there isn't any excitement in the gameplay part. You are limited. This isn't like advanced game, so to speak. It plays kind of similar to some of the 2D side-scroll games on the PS1. It's kind of slow as well. Not to say that the game is bad gameplay-wise. I want to just stress that. But it is a little, slow. If you've played like a Symphonia or Abyss, you will immediately realize that this game's gameplay is little slow. I can see why it's this way. I see what they did, and I understand that it wasn't made by the Tales team, but the game is fairly, to me, easy. It's not hugely challenging. You may even be able to breeze through the game with probably no trouble. You may have a couple of boss fights that might be a little bit annoying, but nothing that will ruin the experience. But if you want a very challenging game, Legendia is not for you. I can tell you that with honesty. But I think the gameplay part is just kind of a small bit of everything else that actually works together with it. I would say gameplay in this case for Legendia is not the most important part. It's important that it progresses it along to the main plot of the story and the world you're in, but I think it needs the story, character development, and everything else to make the game work. If you look at the gameplay from its weakness, to me, I think it's actually the weakest part of this game. It's not something that will deter you from it. Now, if you're one of those people who really want a really intense battle system, it is actiony, meaning when you attack, you're going to use those button commands. Typical Tales game where you are combining the magic and the attacks together. It's there, but it's limited. And compared to Abyss and Symphonia, it's very limited in that respect. But the game works. Now, if you want that freedom of three-dimensional movement on a 2.5 scale, it's not going to happen. You're left and right only. But don't let that deter you from the game, and don't let that small problem seem like that it's going to ruin the experience overall. Go into the game with that least expectation, and I think the battle system won't be a disappointing factor if you look at it from the aspect that it's not made by the Tales team. It's still a good game for what it does.
I agree. I think that the battle system does have its issues, but if you look at it on its own, it is pretty decent. It only looks less so if you compare it to the other games in the series.
Before I get into this, imagine a fence. Shintai and Forest on this side of the fence, and I'm on that side of the fence.
Hold on, can we be fighting a pizza, by the way?
Yes, the gameplay in Legendia for me is kind of where I draw most of my faults. Outside of battle, customization-wise, there's no customization. I'm used to the fact that a lot of RPGs don't like to give you like a skill tree or something, but come on, even Abyss and Symphonia 2 had more customization than this. There's level up, learn arts, level up, learn arts, that's it. One of the cool things I did like though was you don't learn arts from leveling up actually. You learn them from attacking with your current moves. Like you might have Demon Fist and you use it 50 times and then you'll get double Demon Fist and then you'll get Demon Rage or something like that. So I thought that was a neat idea that your moves could evolve and they can level up. I thought was neat. One of the things that I felt was a lost opportunity though was this whole idea of combining two arts to make a new one. So I went to the screen, I was like, all right, this is really cool. I can make some really awesome moves. And then when I formed two moves together, it would say, for example, something like dive under the ground and toss a werewolf and smash him into the ground, meaning that this move will only work on that one enemy. Now, that is completely retarded because one, I don't know where I'm going to find this enemy, when I'm going to find this enemy, or if I fought this enemy in the past and just don't remember. So it's like, that's something I just never even bothered with.
To be fair, that was only for the main character, Sen. That was only for his grab techniques. If you play the game as Chloe instead, which is something that the game allows you to do, you don't only play as the main character if you don't want to. It actually lets you play as the other character. If you do the same thing for the other characters, they don't have grab techniques, so they learn different skills instead.
That I'll retract then. See, that's something I didn't know. That I'll retract. The battle system, to me, I'm gonna have to be honest, it kind of did not really work for me. I understand the idea and appreciate the idea that it kind of plays in like a Street Fighter type format where it's a line. When I first played the game, I was like, all right, this is neat, this is different. But then as I played like 5 hours into the game, this did not work because it's very hard, especially when you don't have the moves such as Phantom Dragon Dance to like get on the other side of the enemy. It is just not possible to dodge enemy attacks because it is very easy to get surrounded. Your character's always in the way, the enemies are surrounding you and there's not a lot of space to get out of the way. And you could try doing the backstep, but an enemy might attack you from behind and you'll take critical damage from a guard break. That's just something I did not care for. And I felt the controls during the battles were kind of clunky. I'm always moving around too fast, and if I always want to try to turn around, Sentinel's gotta stop, turn around, and then keep running. I'm like, move your ass, you idiot.
The thing about you being surrounded, something that you can actually do in the game is if you have an enemy right in front of you and you just press down, the character will just slide past the enemy behind them.
You have the ability to go around enemies.
It's easy to do that in the beginning, but when there's so many special effects going, when there's so many enemies that are just that, and especially when they're like the size of a tower, it's just honestly, I've been playing Tales games for a long time. I've beaten Abyss, both Symphonias, Graces, and Vesperia, and Legendia I just really didn't get into combat-wise as much as I did in the other ones. Another one of the problems, yes, I know you can play on manual, I know this isn't a problem, but coming from me who's been playing Tales for a long time and who's also played Star Ocean where it plays on like a semi-auto, and when you attack, your character will run to the enemy for you. I played Abyss or something, I would have went to manual, but I was so used to Star Ocean 3, so I was like, you know what, this works. In Legendia, yeah, semi-auto exists, but there were times where I want to do an attack, like I would press circle to do Demon Fist one time, one circle press, and he would do it twice. I'm like, no, you idiot, I told you to do one Demon Fist, and that wastes precious TP. And then, yeah, Demon Fist only costs like 5 TP, but when you're doing moves like Swallow Dance or something that costs 20 TP a piece, and you use it twice without wanting to, there are multiple towns in the game, but there's only one main one, so usually you'll count on that one town. Plus, considering the world map is quite large, and also they have this little teleportation system where you can go from little teleporter to the other teleporter. These are very scattered. The areas aren't very close to each other. If you're like in the middle of the world map and trying to go to the next teleporter, just the mere concept that you're constantly running out of TP because you're pulling off moves that you didn't want to, that's just something that didn't work for me. But the saving grace to me of the combat is climax mode. This thing is awesome. This is kind of has the same idea as unison attacks from Symphonia, where there's a bar, and then as you attack and receive damage, the bar will go up. And then when the bar fully goes up, you can press the L1 button and time will freeze, and then your characters could just go beastly and just launch damage on the enemies. And then before the bar goes down, if you press L1 again, your characters will do an all-out assault at the same time and deal massive damage. And honestly, this actually really changed the tide of battle. Like, you're on a losing streak during a boss, climax mode can actually save your life. This is actually happening many times. I'm fighting a boss, because some of the bosses do put up quite a fight, and I'm losing and I'm gonna die until my climax gauge rises up. I press L1, time freezes, I heal up, and then I quickly go in for the kill, and then I do the all-out assault, and I win. I'm like, yes. So that is the one thing I really liked about the combat system. To me, that's not a little gimmick. That's something that really helps, and that's something that actually I love doing. Even on regular fights, I don't care if I waste my climax mode. I just did it whenever I got it, because it was so awesome, in my opinion. Other than that, gameplay for for me is kind of where I'm the most negative on out of all the aspects of the game.
Well, I do agree that the combat has its issues. It's magnified when you compare it to the other games. I still think that the combat is fun. I still had fun with it. I played through the game twice, and each time I thought the combat was enjoyable. It worked for me personally. I didn't really have that problem of using skills more than once in a row because I always played on manual. I never played on semi-auto, so I had fun with it. Definitely one of the weaker battle systems, for sure. There have definitely been other Tales games with much better battle systems. It's a lot slower, but for what it is, I thought it was alright. I thought it was fun.
I just want to say, before we move on, if you look at some of the older Tales games, Tales of Destiny, Eternia, think of it as a 3D game that went from 2D, tried to retain its 2D form in battle, but it's in 2.5D. And imagine that, but kind of on a more weaker scale. And I guess going from that 2D appeal to that 2.5D approach, it didn't seem to kind of transition very well, which if you look at the more current Tales games, I think they found a match that works in 3D. In Legendia's case, I know they wanted to kind of have that retro feel, and it didn't quite work out very well. But I think it does a decent job. It's still kind of the more weaker aspect of the game.
Okay guys, I think it's time to wrap it up. We all have some pretty different views on the game, but despite this, I think personally the game is worthwhile. It's got problems. It definitely has its shortcomings. And this may be enough to deter some people. But I think others can look past the issues and will be able to find an enjoyable game like I did and like Forrest did. I say if you like what you've heard and you like what you've seen, give the game a chance because it's not a bad game. It does get a bad rep, but trust us, it's not as bad as some people made it out to be. Even Sword, who likes it the least out of the three of us, still doesn't think it's a bad game.
No, definitely not.
So, if you like what you've seen, give it a shot if you're into this sort of thing. Any final words, guys?
To me, Legendia is a very troubled game. It's trying to be kind of its own thing, and it does get the job done. I mean, the music is outstanding, but everything else is kind of meh to no-go. Despite this, the game does have its merit. Let's just get this out of the way. If you like characters in the game, buy this game, like tomorrow. Like, go online and buy it, like now. But it's not a bad game. Like I said, it is my least favorite. It does have its fault. This is after playing games like Abyss and Symphonia and Graces and everything, but it is not a bad game. Don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to sound like I was raging. It was just more of like, oh my god, what could have been. But if you can find it for cheap, check it out.
Well, for me, I absolutely adore the characters. I absolutely love the environments, the setting, and the idea of this ship-like continent floating in the ocean. What I also liked about this game was its originality. The music that really stood out and the vocals that fits the scene and the plots very well. The interesting character development and the battle system may be the weaker of the game, but it works. But the most important thing about this game, which we did not cover, and I want to just say real quick, is that when you beat the main course of the story, there is an additive part that if you've played Graces, you will notice in Legendia there is a similarity. There is this sort of quest-like deal that you can do after you beat the main quest of the story, which will give you some added backstory on some of the characters if you so choose to do so. If you really, want to kind of get extra bucks out of the game warrant-wise, which I think if you do that, you may understand these characters a little more. For me, out of the three of us, I highly recommend this game because whether or not you feel that what we said may deter you away, like Shintai said, I think what will pull you into this game is the characters for a huge part of it. But also I think you can see what the Soul Calibur team did. You can see that they did a quite impressive job, I must say. And it's a game that I do recommend everyone to check out if they have not done so, just because of some reviews or what people have said about it.
Well guys, thank you so much for appearing on this review. I'm always glad to have you guys and talk about some Tales games. I hope you guys had a good time.
Yeah, I did, man. I'm glad you had me on, and I haven't done a review in a while, but this was really awesome to finally be able to get my foot in the door, so to speak, on review, especially on a game I absolutely really enjoyed.
Definitely, I was glad to be able to talk about this game.
Alright guys, this has been Shintai, Swordfish1390, and ForestReviews. Be sure to check out both of their channels. They do some really nifty reviews and other kinds of videos. Definitely check them out. I hope you guys enjoyed. Take it easy.